Recording is on.
Hello and welcome to DXgov, DXDAO Governance Discussion for Wednesday, November 16th, 1600 UTC. Let's look at the agenda first. So we'll do the proposal roundup. As always, a couple proposals that we want to highlight and talk about, some details, and then a couple discussion items, just to update on this month in ENS and some votes going on there. And then carving out a big chunk of time to talk about this phase 3 DXgov budgetary process V1 post there. So starting first with the proposal roundup on Mainnet, we have, you can see 3 live proposals here. This first one is the Register New Contribution Reward Scheme. We talked about this last week. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. It is now still has two days and 19 hours until it can pass, and I think we were waiting for the contribution scheme proposal to pass on Gnosis Chain, and then also waiting for a proposal to go through that scheme to make sure it works before voting for this scheme. I believe Violet had a proposal that used that scheme that was set to go through I think 15, 20, 30 minutes ago. So maybe that, as long as that worked, we should be able to see some votes on that. But yeah, any thoughts or comments on this Register New Contribution Reward Scheme? And then just as a housekeeping, if you are using Gnosis Chain, make sure you are selecting the new scheme there. That's where all things will be going forward, will occur going forward. And then we have the Infinite Genesis Hackathon prizes proposal here. So this is a proposal from Wayne. So maybe Wayne, you want to chat a little bit about this, and then maybe Ross from DXgov can chime in with some of the specifics on who these funds are actually being sent to.
Okay, that's basically just after the Infinite Hackathon, the prizes were, there was like a certain percentage that each organization would pay, but we got together and basically decided that it would be better if we just sent out the prizes in one lump sum from one place, instead of each organization sending out a small percentage of each portion of each prize. So the organizations will refund DXDAO for this amount, and we will send out the prizes individually to the winners. There's one, it says on the, it mentions how many prizes there are and the value of each on the proposal, and it will be sent to the Infinite Guild. But Ross will talk about that. I think that's it, right? Do I need to say more? Is there more information needed?
Yeah, I think that's everything. And so yeah, you can see the address we're sending to there, ending 2F. I'll share my screen briefly here just to demo a bit. So we see the 2F down here. On the proposal is going to a guild. This is just a QA environment because we fixed a couple of bugs that I'm using. And so if you go into Mainnet, we can see this guild, and the address is the same up here. If you want to verify it, and the code's all verified on Etherscan as well. And so this is a non-transferable rep guild that we're kind of trying to dogfood and use for something. Initially, it just seemed like a good fit to start using and testing guilds. So me, Wayne, and Melanie were also just on a call, setting up some test transactions just to prove everything's working fine with this before we go ahead, obviously, with a larger amount of money. So we've done pretty thorough testing, and most of the test cases we've been doing has been with transferring tokens, be that on localhost or in development test networks. But yeah, this is on Mainnet. So this guild we've previously used to deploy ENS names. Actually, the Project Davi ENS was deployed with this guild. And so we can see 2 new proposals being made here. One's just setting the permissions for DAI, so we only need to do this once, and it lets us transfer any amount of DAI that we want, because we don't set a limit on that. And then the next one is just doing a quick test transaction with one DAI going to Wayne and one DAI going to me. And so if this works, it'll just prove that we can do those transactions, that it won't get stuck in here. Although there's actually any doubt about that, but just to prove it and alleviate any worries people have. The guild is also made up of me, Augusto, Melanie, and Medusa, just as an initial amount, some trusted people to go through and do this. Initial thing, obviously, we can set up who should be on this guild and what we should be using it for later. This is just an initial amount to test it out. Oh, and one other thing we need to do before the money arrives is increase the proposal time, because right now it's set to 2 hours just as a test, but it should be a lot longer than that for when we have a bit of money flowing through it. And I think that's everything. I don't know if there's any questions on any of this, but then the next thing, once the money comes in, will just be to create a proposal, which instead of sending money to me and Wayne, will go and transfer the correct amounts to all the winning people that were in the hackathon.
Yeah, and so just that's the test proposal, I guess you're talking about right here, the live one, that you will be transferring DAI to what for .eth, and that will conclude in 33 minutes. And then I guess once this mainnet proposal would pass, it would transfer the DAI to this guild, and then the guild would do the same transactions it's doing here, but to the infinite prize winners.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and on the snapshot thing, I'm pretty sure snapshot was based off of like Balancer, because it was involved with Balancer from the original times in terms of they were building for them. And the Balancer designs were actually based on, were partially worked on by Geronimo, who also did these designs. So there may be some reason that there's some.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know Geronimo worked on that.
I know Geronimo worked on Balancer, so I know that.
Oh,
one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
A little bit.
Yeah, we're actually
the older design, like the V1 design, is actually similar to like some of the DXvote thing. It's a the DX Trust things, but
yeah.
Anyway,
we're also having a slight redesign to make it look a bit more visually appealing, I guess, like less minimal. But yeah, like a lot of the UX is based around Snapshot.
Cool. So that's the second proposal. Already show of support for Melanie here, but maybe after those test proposals go through, there will be some other votes there. And then the last one on Mainnet is the second half of the D-Labs worker proposal from September 23rd to November 23rd. Dave is claiming this on Mainnet because he likes playing in the big boy land. And so that's it for, and it's also actually a good call for people who've done rep syncs in a while. If you haven't done a rep sync in a while, it's always good. You can combine that with a proposal that you are also doing, that you're getting paid, and you can kind of hit two birds with one stone. It's also good to do the rep syncs, I think every 3 months or so. And, gas prices are down in USD terms now. So that's it for Mainnet. Let's switch over to Gnosis Chain. So we have this one here, the Violet contributor proposal. This is actually the one I said that's on the new scheme here. And then we have a couple different cow swap orders. And then we have what was potentially an exciting swap 50K USDC to XDAI treasury move. But Dave, we discovered maybe an issue with this earlier, and we're not sure. We don't think this proposal is going to go through. You want to walk us through this proposal here?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, this proposal essentially approves 5,000 USDC to the 3-pool curve, then does a trade to wrapped XDAI and unwraps that XDAI. However, SpaceInch withdrew some outstanding USDC that they still hadn't withdrawn from a proposal they had. And so we actually don't have 50,000 USDC anymore in Gnosis Chain right now. So for that reason, unfortunately, the proposal will fail or won't go through. And yeah, given that we're currently running a bit low on funds, one proposal Chris and I had was to perhaps use in the Omni-chain multisig we have, which I'll post the address here. We actually have like $207,000 in there, which we were intending to buy LUSD with once it repegs to 1. But LUSD is still like 4% above the peg. So I think perhaps it would be a good occasion to kind of use these DAI, return them to the treasury, just rather than returning them to the mainnet treasury, we can just bridge them over to the Gnosis Chain treasury. That way we should have enough funds until end of the year, and we can probably do like 150K DAI and then the rest in USDC, just so we have some USDC reserve there as well. But I think that would be the most efficient way to do it, and that way we also manage to do it immediately, you know, without having to pass the funding proposal on Mainnet, which of course also takes its sweet time. And I guess, yeah, if no one is opposed here to doing that, then I shall use the powers vested in me through my wallet being a signer on the multisig to prepare those proposals to do what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other good thing with this is this would push us. This would fund Gnosis Chain based at the end of the year. I think in terms of enough things there, and then getting to that point, we can hopefully get to where things are being funded through the budgetary cycle there. And so I think this would be a good way of getting us over that line there. And LESD is, as I said, it's trading at $1.04 now. And so we had originally held off and it was $1.02. And so I think a discussion for maybe another time of how to reacquire that or how that price stabilizes in less market volatility. Yeah, and I think Ross, for most of those, I think for that we can get to that in a bit in terms of likely those will be like funded from Mainnet. I think that'll be cleaner to have those kind of coming from there. We can talk about the specifics of that. We could have the single proposal kind of Gnosis Chain. But in general, like one of the reasons we ran out of like the funds are lower here is because there's some very large large withdrawals or large payments on Gnosis Chain. And I think in general, it makes sense to use Mainnet for things that are say like over $25,000 just because that is where like the primary treasury is, and then it does have some of the it's easier to rebalance. I mean, so like the lateral payment was about 30,000, and then then 45,000, and partially because this is all coming, we're paying this out in DAI, and some of the other stable coins that we have in the treasury are in other different currencies. So anyway, it is like a little bit to balance all of these things, but I think getting this from the multi-sig and then using that on Gnosis Chain, I think is the clearest way to get through like the end of the year. And then we have a little bit more, a better system for managing it going forward, I think, through the budget cycle process. We can talk about that in a minute. Ross. Yeah, what's the DAI exposure to Gemini though? I mean, it has the USDC element too in it, just because there's some I mean, what does it have? Like a couple million in debt? The GUSD. I didn't even know GUSD has like more than like $100 million in market cap. I feel like that's much higher than I was expecting. 6% of DAI is in GUSD. I mean, I think this is a slight tangent, but GUSD is still like backed by a trust. It's like a New York regulated trust institution there. I think that's a little bit different than the Gemini Earn account. Anyway, let's just keep going here in terms of the Gnosis Chain proposals here. We have a lateral fee payment. So this is, they were on the call last week. And so this would be, the payment for that, I think is for 30,680 XDAI, also one we would like be able to pay out through this XDAI transfer here. So they were on the call last week, and I wasn't sure if anyone had any thoughts or comments on that? We still have a day and 7 hours to vote on this proposal. Cool. And then the other proposals here on Gnosis Chain, there's as I said, there's 3 total cow swap orders there. We're hoping to get a mainnet one, and I think by today or tomorrow we had to adjust some of the in order to get the order signing from mainnet. It's a little bit different that we had to adjust that, but hoping to do that there. We can see we have 3 Gnosis Chain ones here. We have 2 proposals from Van Grimm through Zanar Khan AB. So this is one is compensation only and the other is rep. And yeah, I think the thing to note about this one is that it does propose for 20% to be spent on NIMI. There was some discussion in the forum on this and also elsewhere. And so this proposal was submitted just a few hours ago, and will become boosted, presumably boosted in 19 hours, and then will be able to be voted on. And that's the compensation proposal. And then there's the rep proposal that is separate for Van Grimm. And then not on the agenda because it was just boosted recently. Here we go, 3 minutes ago. For Thomas Polenta proposal here, we have I think there's a retrospective and also the upcoming one there. Cool, and I think that is it for Gnosis Chain. I wasn't sure if there were any other thoughts, comments on Gnosis Chain proposals. Cool. And then moving on, to discussion items, as you can see here, the kind of 2 talk about here. The first one, ENS DAO here. So wrote a post this morning about this month in ENS DAO. So just a reminder, in September, DXgov delegated Caney Fork its 47,000 ENS tokens to vote on its behalf. ENS was really, and as part of that, I want to keep the DXgov updated on the ENS DAO happenings and be able to use its ENS tokens to be able to express its interest in the ENS ecosystem. The big thing kind of in ENS DAO over the last month, that's kind of from the governance perspective, is they're picking a fund manager. And so they have this selection of an ENS DAO endowment fund manager. This has been a really interesting process to follow in terms of seeing the different groups that are pitching DAO like ENS on this treasury management of it. And so, ENS actually has a good amount of revenue coming in from ENS name subscriptions. So I think they have like a treasury that's like 40 million, maybe 30 million dollars. That's basically all in ETH right now. Mostly in ETH right now. And there will be additional ETH streams coming in there as you have ENS registrations going forward. So this is meant to basically just this proposal is meant to find a fund manager to be able to basically manage the treasury and make sure that there is like a payout of a certain amount of funds to fund the ENS DAO ecosystem in perpetuity. They had like 15 groups initially expressed interest, then it was whittled down. Then I think only 8 actually submitted proposals there. And then they had just recently whittled it down to 3 proposals where they're considering their proposals. And so one of them, I think people around here will recognize as Kapartki there. And then the other 2 are Avant-Garde, also used to be Enzyme Finance. Maybe some of you have been familiar with them. They've been around a lot. And then Llama, who does a lot of work with Aave, and they've done a lot of different other kind of treasury work. They also actually had a proposal that was teamed up with Alistor, who's been on some of these calls before. So anyway, you can see the different proposals if you want to go in. I won't go into the detail here. I think of both Kapartki and Avant-Garde were pretty great proposals and really kind of emphasized a lot of professionalism. But I think one of the key things that the ENS DAO wanted and the teams are offering in their proposals is they wanted to have trustless, non-custodial treasury management. So I think this is really exciting to hear from like a lot of the work that we've been doing on that's something that like DAOs will manage in the future. So Avant-Garde itself is like a whole protocol for asset management. It's a little old in terms of when it was designed. So it kind of has this like more like traditional fund manager model on the blockchain feel to it. So it was launched like 2019. 2020. But it has a lot of bells and whistles in terms of like giving managers ability to manage funds on behalf of another not client, a client, or I guess wallet address. Yeah, so that one's good. And then Kaparki is, as they talked with us, has been working on like a Gnosis Safe module to be able to manage this. And so they have, a Zodiac module on the Gnosis Safe to be able to manage that. So the vote will go, I think it's November 18th at midnight. I believe it's UTC time. I can't remember which one there. And so right now leaning towards Kaparki just because we kind of have a familiarity with them. I know they're done some good work with Gnosis, but there is a poll at the bottom of this if you're interested in that. Elsewhere, they deployed, there's deployment of the new contracts on Gurley was in September. This is kind of a long-awaited update, and actually just something announced this morning is that they're actually going to send the contracts back for another audit there. And so that I think will start in a week or so there. Yeah, and then some other kind of fun things here. There was a great ENS DAO 1-year anniversary event. I tried to do some of the Pixel stuff, but I couldn't figure it out. But I know Wayne and Zet and others were in a great Pixel battle there that represented DXgov, Nimi, and Swapper in that. So that's fun there with ENS DAO celebrating 1-year anniversary. And then a lot of interesting things just in terms of overviews of the ENS DAO ecosystem. Nick Johnson gave a presentation on this, and then Masari themselves actually gave a state of ENS. They have like one of those quarterly reports they do for different projects. They did it for ENS, which I think exemplifies or kind of shows the strong financial position of the ENS protocol in a lot of ways. And then, yeah, just a couple weeks ago, there was an ENS town hall, which just had a bunch of information across the ecosystem. If you're interested in trying more, I had a great update from Zet from Nimi on there. Yeah, and if you're interested, there's a pretty good weekly ENS DAO newsletter for these things if you want to stay more up to date. Otherwise, yeah, if you have any thoughts on who ENS DAO should select as their endowment manager, make sure and go vote. Any questions, thoughts on ENS DAO stuff? Cool. So let's move into, this post made yesterday on DXgov budgetary process V1. I know it's long. It's kind of got a lot of dense things in it. So maybe thought we could just kind of go over here and open up to questions and kind of continue this conversation. Here. So, just thinking about where we are. In mid-September, we passed a proposal, so we're going to do these 3 phases. There was already been a phase 1 proposal, the low-hanging fruit proposal, which said we're going to agree to these things and kind of execute them immediately. The phase 2 proposal, which passed over the weekend, was basically we're agreeing to shift to this new model and explore this new model. And then the phase 3 is basically implementation of that. So I think the 5 different things in the phase 2 restructuring proposal, the first one is 6-month budgetary cycles. The second one is implementing, eventually exploring the implementation of squad councils. The third one is the implementation of a priorities board. And then we have the fourth one, overarching vision as enable community freedom. And then the fifth one is establish direction as decentralized pipeline for communities. So there's a lot of discussion in terms of how this vision comes into reality in 4 and 5. But really today we want to focus on this first one, like number 1. So DXgov will implement a 6-month squad-based budgetary cycle and shift contributor proposals to their respective squads. So I think if you could just like look at what this governance call is, a lot of times, I mean, almost like half of it is different contributor proposals that are up for vote. A lot of people are somewhat familiar with who these contributors are. Like we try to say like what they're working on, what they're kind of doing, but it oftentimes is not necessarily like the most pressing thing in terms of gathering people on this call or the pressing thing in terms of governance attention. I think it is important that we have we value like governance attention and be able to like make sure that there's like the most important things are happening there, and then we're delegating things elsewhere to more autonomous entities that can operate on their own. So this is kind of like the first step in that process. So I'm trying to do that here. I think the first thing I wanted to propose, and is shifting the terminology. I think one of my favorite things to do is kind of to do a mind shift is to come up with a new word for something. And so I think, we do think a lot about funding squads, and we have this idea of squads or these teams working on these different projects. But I think going forward, when we think about who is going to receive funding from DXDAO, we could think about them in terms of guilds, right? And guilds are basically almost like a little bit higher up, maybe from squads that could kind of like relate to those. But I think guilds really implies some level of governance aspect to this. And I think with this, you could also see that this rolls out very nicely with all the stuff like Ross is doing in terms of Ross and DXgov are talking about in terms of the guilds work right now, that we can really dog food our own product by having these guilds manage, get funding from DXDAO, execute on priorities all through DXgov backed infrastructure. So yeah, the way that wanting to kind of run this through, we'll have a couple steps to this. So there'll be a guild budget draft posted in the forum. There'll be a public presentation either on the product strategy or governance call. So that's either on Wednesday or Friday. Then there is a community feedback phase. There will be a signal proposal on Gnosis Chain. I think about this in terms of, do we want to approve this? And then a mainnet funding proposal, one at the beginning and one halfway. And this kind of gets to Ross in terms of where the maybe where the funds are coming from. In large part, I think it's just easier because the funds are on Mainnet already. So no matter where the guild itself is managing, and I presume a lot of the guild will be, for instance, paying out contributors probably on Gnosis Chain because it's cheaper. I think in the end, having the funds come from Mainnet is important, just because that's kind of the area that has all the funds that we would eventually have to take out anyway. But I think that's like maybe a minor thing we can talk about in terms of execution there. And this is kind of an initial schedule here. So I kind of had these 4 different ones here in terms of being able, like groups to be able to plow through this here. Sorry, 5. So starting on Monday, that'd be 2 weeks ago. From 2 days ago, we'd have the contributor X governance and treasury draft budget that's posted in the forum. And then 2 days later, we would present it here. And then that would be up for community discussion for 7 days. And then that at the earliest it could be submitted is 7 days after its public presentation. And so that we could start that there. And then you can see here doing the DXgov this week, and then Swapper this week, and then giving time, basically like a week time after the presentation for community feedback for both of those. In terms of I imagine the DXgov one will be is an established team, as Swapper is an established team. So those will probably take a little bit of time there. And then, yeah, so you can see the kind of schedule here that we're proposing there. Yeah, and then in terms of 6-month budgetary cycles, I think what we want to do is this is the maximum of the 6-month budget consideration. I think most of the existing products will be using a 6-month one, but I think the same system could be used to be able to fund things on a more granular basis or on a smaller time frame. I also think it could be used to fund things that are not necessarily on a time frame basis. The Infinite Hackathon is a great example where we obviously could have like a guild managing the Infinite Hackathon, which is tied to producing and delivering the Infinite Hackathon, not necessarily to providing services to DXDAO over a certain number of period. But I think for right now, like the main process here will be for the primary ones that will be submitting a 6-month budget. I think some of these will go through more easily than others. Some are like more controversial than others, and it may kind of take some time to go through this. I want to give some time for that, but I also think that time will help kind of make sure that we have like a solution to these here. In terms of like the template, what they all need to do. So I kind of divided these into 3 different things. Like 1 is guild vision, objectives, and responsibilities. 2, contributor roles and compensation. 3 is other costs. There's a spreadsheet kind of for people to fill out there that we can go into a bit. I think these are, let me zoom in a little bit here. I think these are maybe some key questions that we're going to want everyone to be able to answer. And I think, having these in a template and a format that is digestible by a lot of different groups so we can make decisions, I think is really important. Not just having this very long list of things, but having that kind of clear idea of that. So you can see here, vision, how does this guild contribute to DXDAO's mission and execute on DXDAO's priorities? Guild structure, what is the address of the guild? How is this guild governed? I think for most of these, we should be looking into using the rep-based guilds. Maybe for other funding, you could use like a multi-sig or something, but whoever is getting funding, like how exactly is those decisions going to be made? Objectives and responsibilities, what will be delivered by the guild and what ongoing responsibilities does it manage for DXDAO, right? I think some things are in terms of deliverables, like this will be produced. That's very clear. Whereas there's some things for DXDAO you could think like, contributor X in terms of onboarding thing, like the responsibility of the contributor X squad is to be able to fulfill this responsibility of helping to onboard different groups. So I think having those kind of clear there as the overall objectives. The budget, the big four different, I guess the categories here, what's the USD amount, what's the vested DXD amount, the regular cost versus contingency cost. So of course, these would be in greater detail actually in like the spreadsheet when the groups are filling them out. You'd actually be able to go into the line item on these, but just giving like the overall amounts here. I did want to carve out both, think about the vested DXD amount, because right now contributors get paid like vested DXD. So how exactly would that vested DXD end up making its way into contributors' hands? Would it actually go to the guild, who would then have a vesting contract that it would then issue itself? Or would that just come from DXDAO itself? But I think at least putting that budget of the vested DXD, I think, is important in this, because I can also see in the future that maybe some guilds are more incentivized by dollar compensation because they're providing services, certain services, whereas others are more compensated by DXD. So I think that will be an important part. I put then this regular and contingency costs. So I think the regular costs are ones that are expected. These are the ones we kind of have already found the resources for. But I do think we also want to consider being able to approve budget for things that we don't yet have. So this was coming up this week with the Swapper team and wanting to basically hire like a senior Solidity engineer for Swapper. And then the question is where does that budget get approved and where do those funds go? And so I think we want to be able to commit to that, to commit to offering like a senior that DXDAO is looking for this. But maybe does that mean we have then all the funds already get sent to Swapper even before they've found that person? So I think having this contingency cost element would be a good way of finding a balance between those two. Key milestones and goals. How should this guild's work be judged, and what long-term goals is the guild trying to achieve? I think this is really important in terms of anyone asking funding from DXDAO will need to say, this is how you should judge me. These are the key kind of metrics to have. And I also think there is an element that you want to have a little bit of the long-term objectives in there, because, Swapper or DXgov are going to be talking about, these are the objectives. These are the things you should judge us on over the next 6 months. But, DXgov and Swapper are not building for the next 6 months. They're building things that will be around for several years, and they're building towards that future. So keeping a little bit of that long-term element in there, while also being able to judge on the actual performance of the 6 months. And then, key guild personnel, who are the primary contributors to the guild, listing names of people there right in the beginning here. So I think this will be really important in having into the actual DAO Talk post. And then there will be more specifics in terms of the actual amounts there. And then, I think there'll be, as I said, there'll be a feedback phase after it's posted. So we'll post and then have it post in the forum 2 days before. There will be a presentation on it, at least a day, I think, before, so that people have time to understand what's actually being presented, and then you can present it. And then there will be a week of feedback phase. And then after that week of feedback phase, that's when you could submit that's when the guild could submit the proposal for approval. Now, I imagine some may take longer than 7 days. And so there may be some kind of feedback. Of course, the proposal could get submitted and it could get rejected there. So next steps, I'm finalizing an expenses update this week. So we had one a couple months ago I posted, but we should have one that I present that on Friday. So I think that will be a really helpful thing to inform squads or guilds on what exactly should be in the budget. I think it'll also be a thing to inform DXDAO governance, what has money been spent on in the past, and how will that relate to the future. So once that's set up, I will send each of the squads here are all the costs that you've had over the last 3 to 6 months, and kind of that will be a basis of like what maybe some of those costs are going to be going forward. Obviously, some of those have changed as things have changed there, but having that as a basis, I think, will be good. And so then, yeah, we'll talk about that on Friday. And maybe I've got some FAQ here that we could go into, but I could maybe just like pause here for like questions, comments, and I have maybe, and other things. We could keep going. Let's keep going. Do guilds need to follow DXgov guidelines? So guilds are autonomous, but will still rely on many DXgov guidelines for operation. This may include compensation guidelines, on and offboarding policies. Guilds are also expected to operate in the same ethos as DXgov: transparency, commitment to promote decentralization, etc. Guilds will have the ability to carve their own way, but still will be accountable to DXgov governance. I think this is, a key kind of point where there's autonomy, but it still will be accountable to DXgov governance. I think being both of those. It's recommended that guilds do 2-3 month proposals for worker proposals. But again, it's up to guilds to be able to do that. You can imagine that there is like a standard process that Contributor X is helping out with a lot of these groups on, and it'd be better if the squads could piggyback off of that process. But again, like up to the guilds to be able to do that. The hiring decisions, the guild will need to get permission to make a big hire from getting a budget approval, but ultimately who they hire with that will be up to the guild itself. And then of course, if the guild then will be responsible if that hire doesn't deliver in the end. Reputation, I think this is an interesting thing to think about. At the start, I think contributors should still be receiving the same amount of DXgov reputation that they're getting, 0.1667%. But I could imagine that maybe contributors to those guilds actually start earning reputation in the guilds themselves. And then I don't know if it makes sense to rethink about how DXgov is distributing reputation, because maybe DXgov should be distributing reputation to the guilds themselves, right? And so then you could have like the DXgov guild has a certain amount of reputation in DXgov itself. So I think for now we kind of keep things as is, but that's something I think would be really interesting possibilities in the future. Are there any budget limitations? The phase 1 proposal limited the overall budget for event budget DXgov to 150K, the overall audit budget to 150K. So something to think about in terms of how much will be spent on events next year if you have if you're putting that in a proposal. So next year from January to June, I know that ETH Denver is during that time. That's something that I'm thinking about wanting to go to and potentially do that. And so if you're going to do that, you got to put that in the budget. I don't know if there are other events that other people are going to want to go to, but that 150K is about 2.3K per contributor for all of the 6 months. The same thing with the audit, the phase 1 proposal limited it to 150K there. And so in terms of what different groups are proposing for audit needs, I guess it'd be the product teams. That's a limitation, even though there is some flexibility if there's a big need in terms of a use case for that. Payments will still be able to be made outside the budgetary process, but I think we should move away from that. So we should discourage that there. As I said, it could be like a specific product opportunity, or say something like an audit for governance 2.0, or like a big thing that needs, the vulnerability disclosure, for instance. That's something that's probably not going to be in the budget, but I definitely think we should be getting in the habit of all DXgov expenditures should be going through a budgetary process. What about existing worker proposals? Contributors should, this is kind of starting to affect some, it would be really great to make sure you're only receiving payment for work to be done in 2022, just so I know proposals are going forward. And typically if you get the second half of that proposal, it shouldn't matter yet. But I think the goal is to have those starting in the beginning of January to be switched over there. Just some issues to be resolved. As I said, the contingency costs, thinking about how those work, and we want to carve those out in order to be able to signal that DXgov has approved budget for this. Do you want to also send the funds with that, or do we want to make sure that that is only in the event that those resources have been found? Then how many guilds need direct funding from DXgov governance? So I think some are simple. I think this is mostly I think DXgov and Swapper are pretty simple, that those like are Swap already has a token. I think that is like a group that is kind of very independent. DXgov is kind of moving that direction. But I think for like all the other squads, I'm not sure if them alone are enough of a like entity or structure to be able to have like their own guild. So I could see like a world where we're only having, say, like 5 guilds total, and that some of the squads are basically like reporting through those guilds themselves. So we can talk about how that will work there. How do guilds make decisions? Guild lead, reputation system. I think this kind of fits in that earlier point. I think if we can commit to like, here are these like 5 guilds that will receive funding, and then they are all using like a reputation-based system. Eventually, we kind of think about that distribution for those initial squads. I think that would be like a good start in terms of being able to have like these guilds function and be able to get funding and also scale kind of with the squad system. DXD payments, just, I think it is a different model when we're talking about funding kind of squads versus funding from DXDAO itself. So I think we need to just chat about how those would work. And then this is kind of just the existential question, should DX Voice service Swapper Guild or DXDAO, right? So you could imagine, I actually saw this on, I think, Boris's proposal here. So like Boris is helping out on Project Davi and Carrot here. So like this is, this great work that Boris is doing for that. And that's like something we need to DXDAO wants to pay for. Then the question is just like, how is that funded? So that either could be funded where like as part of DX Voice's mandate or as part of their objectives and responsibilities, one of them is providing support to Project Davi. Alternatively, DXgov could basically pay DX Voice to fulfill those services themselves. And then part of DXgov's budget would be like, hey, we need to include marketing and like design help as part of our budget. So, I mean, I think for it'll depend on the scenario. I think the more like established a guild will be, the more that they will want to be able to like have control of that themselves and basically be able to hire other guilds. And maybe in this like initial transition phase, we should be thinking about, what's the easiest and cleanest way to fund. But there's lots of different ways that these things can interlock. And then, just the last thing I'd say is like all costs needs to live somewhere. This is, when people kind of talk about a lot of points I'm making is like when things leave the treasury and we want to be able to calculate where these costs go, we have to assign them somewhere. And so just being aware of like where they're assigned, I think is the question that anyone submitting any proposal for DXDAO governance, we have to be very clear that like the costs kind of all come from somewhere and they need to be accountable to DXDAO governance, rep holders, and DXD holders, and the like. Okay, I think that's mostly it now. Any questions now? Comments, feedback? We should do this. We shouldn't, Augusto.
Yeah. To me, it's the biggest question is what about reputation? Because this is the most valuable thing, in DXgov. I think they give you the most control, if you want to say that, or the voting power. So I actually have an idea on how the reputation can be distributed. The idea is that the way this will work on my mind, at least, is that we are going to be using governance 1.5, which means that we are going to have wallet schemes or schemes that will be able to execute multiple operations. We won't be constrained anymore by the one proposal, one transfer that we are using right now. So the way I see those, or as I understand it, or I think will be the easiest way is that every time that a period passes, a 6-month period passes, let's say here for the budget, we do a proposal where we transfer all the reputation that we need to transfer, right, to all the contributors in those guilds. That will be an option. And another option is that the contributors go and claim it individually, but we will have to keep track on that. So I see 2 possible ways. If I am contributing DXgov for 6 months, and I have reputation that belongs to me for the 3 months of contribution, will I be able to go and claim it on those 3 months, as long as I'm receiving the payment from the squad or guild, or will I receive it on the end? Let's say that DXgov, squad, or guild can create the proposal, or the leader of the squad can create a proposal to DXgov saying, this is what happened on these 6 months, this is how things went, and this is the reputation minting that we need to do. To all these, let's say 6 addresses, we mint 0.2%, let's say, something like that, right? To each address. So I think it will be great if we can, the more that we can explain regarding reputation and DXG vesting contracts, the easiest, because the payment, the financial amount, the USD payment, that can be done directly from the guild, right? So that won't be a problem. For the vesting contracts, we might have to do some work to do a vesting contract that can receive that the contract can be the same. So each contributor has his own vesting contract. You have a unique address and you receive vestings here. And this is keeping track of the vesting you receive, and it's have a compound vesting structure or something like that. But we can design it in a way where a contributor is going to have a vesting address. You just send the vesting there, and that can be done from the guild as well. So the guild can also send payments on USD and DXG to the vesting contract of each contributor. And the reputation at last, it can be distributed at the end, because for the reputation, we need to create a proposal on the DAO level, right? Which means on the proposal on the scheme. So that can be done, let's say, every 3 months if we want, at like a mid check-in of the 6 months period, or at the end of the 6 month period.
Yeah. And there's basically there's 2 elements, or there's the what is actually being distributed, like the DXD amount, the rep amount, or whatever, and what are those? And then the second is with the logistics of actually how that is happening. And how is the DXD getting vested? How is the rep getting distributed? So we need to think about kind of both of those. I think kind of also Ross and I were talking about some of the the actual distribution and elements of this in terms of people getting paid from the guilds, coming up with an easy process for that. And again, it's also great that we're using we're dogfooding our products here, so we can kind of see what that is. And so I think those are all definitely important. Not all of those will we need to have buttoned up in very specific when we pass the initial budget, but we should be figuring those things out.
Something that can also be done, taking in account that Gnosis 2.0 is coming, that you can, the reputation is going to work in a different way, right? The voting, you are not going to vote with reputation anymore in the future. You're going to vote with your voting power. And your voting power is going to be the result of how much reputation and DXG you have. Also, it's if this guild is going to distribute this amount of reputation and this amount of DXG on vesting contract, we send this to the guild. This is going to equal voting power, right? In some way, it can. Maybe there are some tricky way of how to take in account if you are sending the DXG and reputation to a guild. But anyway, this reputation can be used. Let's say you have 5 contributors on. Let's continue using DXgov. DXgov, you have 5 contributors, and these contributors are going to receive in total 2.5 reputation on one after the 6 months. So you can send out reputation 2.5 to the guild, and it can be used to the guild during those 6 months. And when the 6 month passes, you burn those 2.5, and you mint 0.5 to each address. So that's something that can be done. That will be essentially like a transfer, right? But we cannot do transfer.
And presumably the guild itself could initiate that proposal to DXgov, or would it need to be an individual?
That is something else. Because what happens if you have internal issues or internal discussions on the guild where the members don't agree on what should be sent to the DAO, or they can take entire ownership of the DAO. So we need to design the guild in a way where each guild can be, where it can have a backdoor for the DAO, where the DAO, if things are getting, if the DAO has to intervene, it can intervene. So that's something that can be done. And yet, the thing that every proposal that we want to make from the guild to the DAO level, we need to decide now if we want all the guild members to agree on that, or let's say the guild leader or the swap lead or the squad leader is going to propose that 6 month budgetary process. I think it will make sense for the squad lead to be in charge of that, but I know any guild can work differently.
And you're saying that's in like the actual distribution of the funds, or just the submission of the proposal?
The submission of the 6 month proposal.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, this is what happens when you start thinking about like autonomy and sovereignty. It's like, oh my goodness, what can the guild itself do? And you kind of go down a rabbit hole of trying to make it so there. But yeah, I mean, I think the initial, proposal that can kind of come from whoever, but it is, I think, very cool to be able to introduce another layer of governance in DXgov here through these guilds.
Yeah. To me, later the question stands. Maybe I should comment on the topic later on what I propose to handle the DXD and the reputation.
Yeah, because the DXD you can obviously distribute through the guild, but the reputation you can't, because you transfer it to the reputation. It couldn't then transfer it on there. That's why the burn.
We can transfer it to the guild. So in case we want to use it, so the guild has it. I mean, this reputation is a part of the guild. And once that period passes, you will be able to use it.
Cool.
Which actually makes sense for, let's say, you have 5 members of a guild and you receive 2.5 reputation that will be distributed later. You still have, you are part of the guild and that guild has reputation. So you are actually like closer to having reputation. You have a fifth of the guild power, and that reputation have 2.5. That guild has 2.5 reputation. You kinda already own the reputation, but it haven't been sent to you individually yet.
Reputation debt. What is the time value of reputation?
Exactly. We will have to do some, I know, some sessions on how to use the guild and how that works. Improve the documentation also, put a bit more thought on how we are going to communicate, how everything will work. The good thing is that at least now we have complete control here. So anything we want to change and we have to fix, we can do it right away.
Yeah, and I actually don't think, Venki, we should be doing any big reputation changes at all. Like, I think this right here is a very simple funding thing, and I think the only thing that needs to happen is like the guilds themselves will need to be set up with the reputation distribution, and then like all of these questions about distributed, like we don't need to solve those yet, but those are like the long-term ways of having these different layers working together.
Okay, so from a squad perspective, we create what our roadmap looks like, and then we send out asking for a budget that, okay, this is what we are trying to achieve, and make a write-up of how this will be in line with the mission and mission statement, and then ask for a budget. And then if what else apart from that? Because for that, I know that we kind of understand what needs to be done, but
has that been written down and presented anywhere?
It is getting written down.
So I mean, I think the whole point is the forcing process of not just thinking about it, but writing it down and presenting for people, and and this is where I even think having it in the forum and actual open discussion, not just kind of these are the options we're considering. Yeah, because I think we've actually already, and this is what I think for all this stuff, we kind of already have this stuff in our head, but we haven't really just put it out there and actually decided on these things. And so I think that's the process we need to do. And that's why I think it's both a little tricky because it's new, but we already kind of have the things that we're thinking about here. We just need to go through the motion, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Now I'm reading Ross's comment here. It's not about writing it on a notepad. I'm asking what else needs to be done. Okay, we present it on product strategy, but what do we present apart from the spreadsheet? I mean, do we also ask for, okay, this is the amount of contributors that we are looking for, and what is the reputation it would have, what is the amount of vested DXD, all of those split across levels? How detailed should this go?
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty detailed. I think it can look the same as the one that we did in June, right? So this one that I think you prepared in
June.
In this one, right? So this has I think the level of cost detail, but actually I think doesn't have as necessarily enough as in terms of the objectives and milestones and what is being that. But I mean, I think this is roughly the same level of cost detail. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Ross, this is kind of the contingency budget, right? Because do we want to make sure that if we want to encourage people not to spend money if they don't need it, right? If that's not good. But should you issue budgets to people when we don't yet have the things to pay for that yet?
How about events? Should that go to, should we already budget those, or?
Yeah.
That come from?
Yeah. I mean, so there was the 150K limit set in the phase 1 proposal that is kind of at least a guiding light. And then, I think that is around 2.3K per contributor for the 6 months. If you're thinking about getting permission for that, I think, we're going through a little bit different process in terms of events now, and maybe should everyone go or not. But I definitely think, that should be included in the proposal, as I think it was also included in this one.
Okay.
And I think the DXD and rep conversations are hard and a little tricky because we want to solve something in the medium term, and then also this sets a precedent long term. But I think they are less of the pressing thing, as in let's get this through in the next month or so here. But important things to still consider, but they shouldn't be a blocker, I think, to a budget getting approved. But I mean, I think it is an interesting discussion. I think about Swapper. Itself is I should be okay if Swapper token, or I hope Swapper token is actually part of this budget itself, and maybe there's some distribution of Swapper token to the Swapper guild or something like that, and maybe that's in lieu of DXD or something there. So there are some interesting things I think to do with that, but in terms of creating policies on DXD and rep through the guilds, I think we don't need to solidify that right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Should rep and DXD proportion be contingent on objectives? USD definitely shouldn't. And then, I mean, this kind of gets into a little bit in terms of how closely tied the DXD portion is in terms of payment versus bonus discussion. And so, yeah, I think, and rep has traditionally been not seen as something that is like dependent on delivery, more dependent on effort, I think. But yeah, or I guess people claim rep at the end of their proposal, right? That they've like done that work. So I think for all of these, it's more of like after the work is done, would you get the reward for rep and DXD? Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, like I kind of think this whole process, we should like rethink of a lot of the maybe like bonus incentive structure here. I think what we're talking about here is like the distribution of like paying, like funding development in certain areas that is important to DXgov, which is really important. But I think we could get more creative with the incentive mechanisms for delivering on things. But those are not as much of a like base level of governance process infrastructure. They're more of, I think, like fine tuning to either specific contributors, specific squads, or like specific projects that we're trying to incentivize.
Yeah, I also.
I'll let you say because you were busy talking, Chris, but when would we decide on discuss these guilds formations, if you want to call it, where the smaller ones would be merged or not? Or
Yeah.
would that work?
Yeah. So when I created this calendar earlier, I had November up here, but then I didn't. It was worthless because then I think in November we're basically talking about this process here, and so I would hope that we would have certainty on like this is the process we want to do. These are like the guilds that we expect to do in like the next 2 weeks, right? So starting kind of with this week here, and so yeah, we can talk about this on next Wednesdays here, but hopefully over like the next week or two, we're figuring that out.
Even if we have guilds that are very small, let's say you have 2 people there working, it doesn't mean that the guild on the reputation level, like the guild token, right, that you use to govern that, it needs to be distributed on 2 people, right? You can have like maybe 2/3 of it. It can be on these 2 individuals that work on the guild, but the rest can be distributed on other members of the DAO that wants to be involved and can help on the guild development, or at least contribute on a minimal task to the guild. So we should try to get at least, let's say like 4 members per guild.
Yeah, and I also, this is why I like the distinction between squads and guilds, like not, because like we still have squads, like you still have squads that are working on different things, and those are groups in that, but they maybe don't have a formal governance structure. And then but the guild distinction is when you have like a formal governance structure. And like, yeah, the Dave, the one-on-one guild for me, it's like, yeah, my formal governance structure is myself. I vote on all of my decisions. Venki has a good question. How does this work for a person that's working across guilds? Yeah, so in this case, those contributors should get funding from different guilds. And so I'm like thinking about this for myself. Like, so we have kind of like the governance or operations or kind of like that one, that's a portion, but I also do a lot of work with DX Voice. And so like I would talk with Keenan and the DX Voice team about, do you want to have my services or can you fork services for the 6 months here and like kind of paying out from that. I think for the most part, like we do have less cross guild people than we did before. So I don't think it will be as complicated, but I definitely think contributors will be able to get funded from different guilds. And I guess just like the one other thing, I'm going to have this like security and ecosystem development group, which I think we need to basically have like a guild that is almost like a catch-all for a lot of the development work that we do that may not fit under one squad or one kind of guild yet. So you can think about DXgov and Swapper are these like now established like both products, but also they have like a governance structure around them. But we're still working with like Nimi, still working with Carrot, and then working with like kind of QA and a bunch of other things. So we have this other group for that is a way of funding those development initiatives separate from that. Yeah.
It will also have, I think it will be great having that also to keep track of who is working where and what is and what this person is bringing to this squad, right? Because I saw a lot of worker proposals. I think most of the people here that everyone defines their time working on percentages, and you have 50 here, 10 here, 20 here. So now with this, we are going to be able to see, like, you really have to contribute what you are saying in this squad in order to get paid, right? So it will make us think twice about when are we going to submit, or on what are we going to work on, what are we going to contribute on this squad. I need to make sure that I'm going to bring it, not just propose that, yeah, I will try to do this. No. You will have to propose something that you really have to try to achieve it. If not, you won't get paid from this gear, right? Or I don't know if you won't get paid. You will get paid, but it will be reflected more thoroughly on the analysis of where
the guild would have to answer, I think is what you're saying. Like
exactly the guild, yeah.
And so it's like they're not going to get funding or something, right? Yeah. I think being able to communicate what's going on to both contributors, but also just the DXgov community in general is incredibly important. And I think this benefits that a lot. And so I think, having like, who are the key guild personnel and like, what are they working on, right? We actually don't really have that now because we almost have it coming up from this pure, like, emergent individual contributor level here. But when we have things at a little bit different structure down from the guild, we can get a better idea of all these things. And I think, people can understand where money's going, what people are working on, and that provides like a greater level of accountability all around.
One more question. Will there be sub-guilds of these guilds?
What is a sub-guild?
I don't know how to explain it at this point of time, but for instance, let's say that we have Swapper right now, and then one of the routes that we wanted to take was like spinning Swapper out into multiple different products, right? So if that goes through, and if all of those different products might want to have their own guilds, I don't know. Like,
I think this is what I was making for with the distinction between squads and guilds. So I think squads are like teams that can be a part of a guild, and you can have a squad that I think graduates to a guild. The difference being when there is a formal governance structure. So not just a team about it. I would say not just a multi-sig, but actually like a formal governance structure would be the distinction. So maybe like sub-DAO, sub-squad, sub-guild is just squad.
Squads, okay. I'm just trying to see if we don't overshoot governance, and if we could find a way to keep it optimal.
Yeah, I like that comment, Dave, because that's a product maybe that makes sense for someone that I don't know if we would have thought of if we didn't start dog fooding here. Cool. Well, I think a lot more discussion still to be had, both on this and then the individual ones here. On Friday, for the product strategy call, I'm going to do an update on expenses there. So that one will be I think that will help inform some of this discussion too. I did put some of these dates out here, and I think like kind of some of the big ones, I guess the DXgov and Swapper, think about if those are dates that we want to confirm. But hopefully by like next Wednesday, we have some agreement on these things. But feedback and comments, please on the forum post. Cool. Well, we are over time. Sorry about this. So I guess we can leave it there. Wayne, you want to hit the recording and